welcome back to the UncleJayPodcast. I'm your host, Uncle Jay. Here where we discuss world politics, sports, entertainment. We talk about a little bit of everything, but for the last, I want to say 5 episodes. About 6 episodes because this is the eighth. So for the last 6 episodes, I've been joined with my special guest Roseanne and Patrick. He wasn't able to be with us tonight. He's out enjoying some much needed R&R and watching some college football. So we say have a good time, stay safe, don't drink and drive. And tonight we'll be viewing the fourth episode of The Con. There's one more episode after tonight's episode. I'm going to go ahead and hand the floor over to Roseanne. She's going to explain a little bit about what we're going to be seeing tonight and talk a little bit about a new movement that Mr. Lovell, Patrick Lovell, has put together along with Roseanne, which is the Clean New Deal. And so with that being said, I'll hand it over to my guest, Roseanne. How you doing tonight?
Thank you, Jay. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. Had a long night last night. I had my daughter over for dinner. And, made her a nice dinner. I made her some fried chicken, some collard greens, and some homemade baked macaroni and cheese.
Some collard greens.
Yes,
Very
ma'am.
good.
Yes, ma'am. She come over, spent the evening with us. We had a great dinner. We talked. It was a great time. We all enjoyed it, and I look forward to doing more of such.
That's good.
How was your weekend so far?
Well, my week's been really busy. Patrick and I started doing truth bombs every day.
Yeah, I saw that. I had a conversation with him about it. I told him I think that, he should be doing that live. So we talked a little bit on the phone about it. I think he's going to get with you and lay some things down with you, and we'll see what we can do moving forward. But yeah, I caught it. I actually thought it was live, and then it dawned on me that it wasn't because I'm sending all these comments, and I wasn't getting any kind of response. And I said, this must be a pre-recording. And then that's when I reached out to Pat and we talked about it. And so I think it's something we'll be doing shortly. But go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. No, so we've been doing that. I think the only issue we have with that is getting a time when both of us can be together at one time. Okay.
Yeah, because you're on Vegas time, right?
Yeah, well, he's only an hour ahead of me.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but the thing is that I can set it for a certain time, but he's really busy. He gets lots of phone calls. He's got lots of work that he has to do, and in fact, before we even went on the show the other day, he's getting a call and so it's always hard to pick a specific time. But that's okay. But then this morning, I was up at 3:00 this morning because I went to go feed folks. I do that.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. What is that? What is it that you actually do down there in Vegas?
Okay, so for a number of years, I can't tell you exactly how many years, but I've been cooking food, and there's all kinds of places that I still go to, that I have gone to, where I take the food, it's all cooked, it's all hot. I've got a Cambro that you can put the metal containers in to keep everything warm.
Oh, with the little candles?
No, we don't. This is restaurants use it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like the big tins, and they put those little fuel things underneath them. You don't do that?
No, because I have the brand name is Cambro, but it's like a box and it's insulated and it's got shelves, and you shove the pans in there.
Oh,
okay. And the one I have, you can fit 8 pans of your food, 8 half pans. Oh. And then I just close the latches, take that with, and I take out one at a time, and the food is hot.
Oh, that's
Okay.
amazing. That's
It
awesome.
stays hot. So today we fed, oh, and then I get blankets donated
Oh,
from
okay.
different people. I get all kinds of stuff donated. Okay. And so today we fed exactly 100 people.
Oh, that's awesome.
Okay. We had enough food for 100 people. So next Sunday, I have the meal planned for that. We'll probably feed about another 100 over there.
Oh,
Okay.
that's great. And these are all, I'm assuming, are homeless folk.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Man, that's
And
awesome.
then we have, different hygiene items that we give people and clothes. And we have some volunteers at the place where I go on the first and third Saturday. They own this one family, they own a cleaners. Okay. And you wouldn't believe all the clothes that people leave. Like, say they leave it for 3 months, 6 months,
Yeah.
and there's all these clothes that they bring,
Yeah.
and they've been there, and we've got racks and we hang them up, and people take sparkling cleaned clothes, and they take that with them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, at the dry cleaners that I use, they have like a policy. If it's there for 90 days or whatever, it's belongs to them at that point, and they can do with it as they choose. And that's what they do. They donate it to the Goodwill around the corner from my house. I think it's a really cool thing that they do.
Yeah,
That's why I go there and spend my money with them.
for
Um,
sure. Yeah,
so
yeah, for
that's great.
sure.
So while you're doing your thing with Patrick, you also find the time, because that's a lot of time, a lot of work and stuff, and so you also find time to go out and feed the homeless and help them with hygiene and clothing. That's amazing, man.
That's okay.
Yeah,
Why
no,
not?
I'm just saying it's a
Right?
phenomenal thing to do, especially in
Yeah.
Vegas, because it's got to be hot as hell, right? Yeah, I'm sure you got a tent set up or something, because you'd be, what is it, triple digits sometimes down there in Vegas, right?
Well, it's been very nice.
Okay.
Okay. The last week has been really nice. Um, it's been beautiful, in fact. So I'm not going to complain, but there are places where we go and we bring tents and set them up too. Because, yeah,
Oh, okay.
it's.
Yeah, no, it's tough, man. We have a mission here in the city, so we don't see a lot of homeless people in the city of Buffalo, but they're out there. I mean, it's not like some cities and some states, but we have a mission, and so they usually are able to house how many they ever house. People can go and donate, all things, clothing, foods, and such. They always do like turkey drives and stuff in around about the city, so that they can donate it to the mission and stuff. So always good when you can give back to your community and help folks that are don't have the
For sure.
basic essentials like hygiene, material and food for their stomachs. Why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about the new clean deal, or the clean new deal, and then we'll get into the fourth episode of the con. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the Clean New Deal, I really want to encourage people to go to the website. All they have to do is type in thecleannewdeal.org, and it will take them right to the website. We have links to the con where everybody can click on it and they can get their very own episodes of the con. We have the links to all 19 episodes of the new Untouchables. We have links to the YouTube channel, Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con. We've got 528 episodes.
Mm,
Okay.
that's a lot.
Yeah. And now we keep doing one every day.
Yeah.
So we're really adding a lot.
And
And
all
then,
that's free except for like the swag that you can order off of the website, but the con is free.
Yep,
Any membership to like the YouTube channels or whatever is free. You don't
it's all
charge
free.
like subscription or anything,
No,
so that's always good
no.
that people can see the stuff for free. But talk a little bit about the swag because I know you guys put together some really cool swag. We talked about it last episode, but we can speak on it again. What are
Sure.
some of the things you guys got on the website? I
We
know.
have,
I'm just saying.
yeah, we have T-shirts, of course, with some great sayings on there. We have buttons like, you know, when
Like
you've
go out
got
and
the
vote
truth,
buttons and stuff.
you're bulletproof.
Yep, there you
We've
go. I
got
love that.
we got book bags, we got caps, we got phone cases. Okay.
Cool. Bumper
Um,
stickers too, right?
what's that?
Bumper stickers as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We got bumper stickers. The
Yeah,
clean new
awesome.
deal. Okay.
Well, everybody
Yeah.
go out and check it out, and see
And it
see how it is. Go ahead.
yeah, and it gives you a really good explanation. It tells you that the Clean New Deal is a 501c4 LLC. Okay. People do not get tax deductions, but they can donate to us for our endeavors to be able to, because it we don't have an editor, we don't have so many things. It costs us for having a website, for all the hosting, for all the domain names. But what we really want, of course, is to have an editor that could really help us with our material so that we can, make it, I guess what you would say is what people are used to. Okay?
Yeah, a little more professional.
That's right. That's right.
Polish it up a bit, so it's a little shiny. Well, if there's anybody out there, any editors out there that catch this episode and they would love to work with Roseanne or Patrick, at the end of the show, we'll let you know how you can get in touch with them. I'm sure that they can get in contact with you directly right off the Clean New Deal website, correct?
Yep, they can
Okay.
send questions. There's if people have questions, they can ask us if they want to donate, if they want to buy swag. But the whole thing just flows so well. It tells people, why are we doing this? What is the Clean New Deal? Okay? And I just want to invite them to go look at it. Take some time. Read the articles. Read what our problem is and what's the solution and what can you do about it. And the easiest thing they can do, go to the website and share that address with everybody they know so that we can create an audience so that hopefully before the election, sometime in October, we can get everybody together to go to Washington, D.C., to surround the Supreme Court, the Department of Justice, the FBI, the Capitol building, and tell these politicians this is what we want. We need and want a new Glass-Steagall that separates commercial banking from investment banking. Okay? We need that. You cannot have a bank playing with other people's money. You can't do that. Another item two, we have to have an end to Citizens United. All this money, we got to stop it. We have to stop it, because we've got to stop the Fed, first of all, from giving all that money to the banks they've been bailing out through Obama, through Trump, through Biden. It's got to stop. And we lay out the entire case. But before I go any further, I really want people to see what's in the con, because when you know the con, you have the blueprint. Okay? You have the blueprint. You know how the criminals operate, who they are, what they did, and what they're doing to individual people. So tonight's episode is called When No One's Enforcing the Law. Well, what happens if nobody's enforcing the law? Who takes over?
Criminals.
You got it. You got it. Absolutely. And that's pretty much how our episode 4 is going to start. And I just want people to sit back, relax, take it in. I watched it again last night for the first time in a while. And the more I watch it, Jay, and I'm guaranteed this is going to happen to you too. The more you see the episodes, the more you go on the website, the more you listen to our truth bombs, it's going to become second nature to you. It's going to become so clear. And that's what I encourage people to do. Just watch it, sit back, relax, and take it all in. Okay?
Yeah, well, it took Patrick $4 million to make this documentary, so at least, and he's giving it away for free, and all he asks is that you just watch it, take in the information, and then once you're done watching it, you head over to the new clean deal, and that is the baby child that was born out of the con. And so first he shows you what they're getting away with, and then he shows you how we need to, do peaceful protesting. Like she said, we need to get down to Washington. We need to get around these buildings peacefully and tell them what we want and what we're no longer going to take. And so what the con does is it opens your eyes to what they've been doing without us knowing about it, using Federal Act 13.3 illegally to give the billionaires in this country free money that, the taxpayers have to foot the bill for at some point. And so, what we'll do is we'll go ahead, we'll get into episode 4. We'll come back. We'll talk a lot about it a little bit more. But a thing that I wanted to say, Roseanne, was the more I watch it, the more I learn. Every time I rewatch it, I realize something, or I learn something that I didn't even, the last time. So it's something that I'm constantly watching, and it's just because there's just so much information, and it's such, it's some tricky stuff, because if you don't come from this world, you don't know how to, you don't know what's really going on. And so you may have to watch it a few times like myself, but it's a fantastic, it's fantastic. Patrick, knocked it out the ballpark. And like I said, the child born from the con is the, clean new deal. So without any further ado, we're going to get to episode 4, and, stick around, and we'll talk about a little bit of it afterwards. Okay.
You got it, my dear.
All right. Thank you, Roseanne.
This dramatic increase in mortgage fraud cases was the canary in the mine. It was the warning.
These entities make loans, package them up, give them back to Wall Street.
It was all designed to maximize profits for all of the different players.
They're selling to their very clients these loans that they know are a disaster.
They put our money in investments that they knew that there would be a huge loss. And we can't get this money back.
States like Nevada started saying, wait a minute, this is gambling.
And it became very obvious that this was all part of the same puzzle that was falling apart.
This is the largest conspiracy of lies in the history of the world.
This was where Addie Polk's house sat. Looking at this lot, you wouldn't know that Addie Polk even existed. There's no garden, there's no trees. There's just a place where her house was, and they tore her house down to erase the memory of what happened. But this is what we have. This is where we are.
When you consider what we've learned on this journey, that Ms. Polk was literally targeted. These brokers wanted women, they wanted minorities, and they wanted widows. She checked off all the boxes. And then you think about that, it's almost beyond words to think that's a possibility of what happened.
What Addie needed protection. And there are hundreds, thousands of people who need protection. And that's what we look towards, regulations, we look towards laws to protect. And that's what Addie needed. Addie Polk needed protection.
So if you have no one enforcing the law, what then?
When no one's enforcing the law, the criminals take over.
Self-respect and pride is not what you take with you, but the village of kids you touch who relate to you. You gotta make a strong presence on this generation, because the legacy you leave could change the situation. Your forefathers fought for the freedom of man. I'm just here to remind you that it can get lost again. Take control of the matter. Natural law, rules shatter. We're just here to remind you that it can get lost again.
This mound of rubble used to be a home. This processing plant, not far from Akron, is where destroyed homes are picked through for anything of value. This is where the crushed remains of Addie and Robert Polk's home was brought to once and for all erase the memory of what happened at 1127 LaCroix. Like millions of other Americans, Addie fell victim to an integrated system of fraud where mortgage brokers were rewarded for cheating their customers, and where mortgage lenders took mammoth bonuses for mortgages they knew would never be repaid, and where Wall Street CEOs would report ungodly profits and pay out extravagant bonuses by buying back toxic loans only to repackage them and sell them off to unwitting customers. In between, there was a corrupted system of appraisers, underwriters, and ratings agencies that rubber-stamped it all, because if they didn't, they would never see a paycheck again. It took this entire system to push Addie out of her home of 40 years, and in this place, squeeze every last remaining cent out of her. But Addie Polk was just one of millions of people whose lives were devastated by these crimes, caught up in a tidal wave of suffering like hadn't been seen in nearly a century. And as the pain grew, so did the outrage.
Occupy Wall Street! All day, all week! Occupy Wall Street! USA! 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 USA!
The rise of the Tea Party and the Occupy movements after the financial crisis made one thing very clear. The country was mad as hell, and nobody could agree at who. People on the left pointed the finger at Wall Street. People on the right pointed the finger at Washington. So who was really to blame? As it turns out, both. To answer the question as to why this is the case is to answer the question of what really caused 2008. But if we want to understand the present, we have to look to the past, to the time when the nation last suffered this same kind of economic anguish, the Great Depression.
If you look at the blunt facts of the Great Depression, you had several thousand banks fail. You had unemployment of 25%. I mean, you had people literally starving, right, and living in tar paper shacks in Central Park and things like that. So the level of suffering was truly, astounding.
There were hearings that were set up by the Senate to try to get to the bottom of what had happened, what had caused the crash, was there wrongdoing? And there was an individual by the name of Ferdinand Pecora that was an immigrant that became an attorney. He started the hearings.
He had dealt with organized crime. He wasn't an expert on banking, didn't have to be. He was an expert on scams. And so he did the questioning. Continuous, sophisticated, relentless.
They basically determined in the hearings that the large banks were manipulating the economy, that they were taking bad loans and they were selling those to unsuspecting investors. That truly was the forerunner of what is today known as mortgage-backed securities.
All of this had been successfully covered up. Powerful folks don't want people inquiring, and usually Congress doesn't inquire about the wealthy. Pecora did so successfully, documented abuse after abuse after abuse, and the public was outraged at the bankers, and the bankers were discredited.
Senate investigations were making headlines. It was J.P. Morgan on the grill, telling the senators, yes, his banking house had $250 million in the till, and no, he had not paid an income tax in the last 2 years.
Armed with the findings of the Pecora hearings and the overwhelming support of the American public, President Franklin Roosevelt was swift in holding bankers accountable for their actions, standing up to Wall Street in a way that was unprecedented in the country's history.
We had to struggle with the old enemies of peace, business and financial monopoly. Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We just don't hear modern politicians willing to be that bold and take on powerful folks in that way. So people were ready for a change.
This unprecedented public outrage, combined with equally unprecedented boldness from Washington against elite crime, led to a series of massive reforms that overhauled the way Wall Street was allowed to do business and put cops on the beat who would make sure the banks never went back to their old ways. This amounted to one of the single greatest instances of Washington policy aligning with the will of the American people in the history of the nation.
After the Great Depression, the United States put in a bunch of rules and regulations that, interestingly enough, regulated the financial industry more than at any time in all of history. Regulated them like crazy. And what happened? The United States built the most prosperous and largest middle class in the history of the world. The country as a whole prospered, and interestingly, finance prospered.
We have this 50 years of really strong economic growth in which the frequency of recessions is reduced by more than half compared to what had been true in our history. such that people are able to get jobs in which they can support a family on those wages, and they can buy a home. And it's within their ability to keep that home for 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
It was this period of economic stability that allowed Addie and Robert Polk to buy their home, a small part of the American dream that would always be theirs, so long as the lessons learned from the Great Depression were never forgotten.
People often said that the bankers of the 1940s and 50s, and even into the early 60s, were naturally conservative because the people at the top survived the Great Depression. They saw what happened to banks that took big risks. Well, that generation was gone by the mid-1960s. So that, by the 1980s, memories of the Great Depression have faded.
The old guard, it took them years and years, and new people on Wall Street, they want to do it in 2 days.
What do you get out of this?
Making a lot of money.
It was rock and roll. You could see money driving everything.
Wall Street had not seen this kind of irrational exuberance since the 1920s, everyone having apparently forgotten the disaster it caused in the 1930s.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
But they weren't the only ones to forget the lessons of history. This greed-induced frenzy was only made possible by an increasingly relaxed approach by the federal government toward the rules that governed Wall Street, which had protected the economy and people like Addie Polk for the prior 50 years. This backsliding from the New Deal can be characterized by what experts call the 3 Ds: deregulation, desupervision, and decriminalization. The first of these 3 Ds, deregulation, began under President Jimmy Carter, who in response to out-of-control inflation, took the seemingly innocuous step of deregulating interest rates. And while this did help ease inflation, it would also go on to have profound unintended consequences once a particularly anti-regulation California governor crushed Carter on his way to the White House.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. From time to time, we've been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by self-rule, that government by an elite group is superior to government for, by, and of the people.
This all sounds good if you don't consider Wall Street bankers a small and elite group of people. And while Reagan talked a big game about handing the government back to the American public, all he really did was hand control from an elected group of elites to an unelected one. Instead of Washington elites, it would be elites from Wall Street like Don Regan, who was appointed Treasury Secretary straight from his position as CEO of Merrill Lynch, who would now run the show.
And if Congress...
So while every president since FDR had recognized that too much self-governance on Wall Street was a recipe for disaster, Ronald Reagan, under the influence of these very bankers, came into office ready to hand the reins right back to them.
Driving the bears back into permanent hibernation. That's our economic program for the next 4 years. We're going to turn the bull loose.
One of Reagan's first acts in giving banks their old power back was to transform Carter's deregulation of interest rates into a way of giving banks virtually no limit on how much interest they could charge to borrowers. A change that unscrupulous bankers, who were already playing fast and loose with the rules, were happy to take advantage of.
The Reagan administration didn't understand that that was going to do two things that were going to supercharge fraud and predation. First thing is, in the old days, there was a fixed interest rate. You just couldn't charge Fred or Mary more than 8%, for example. But now you could. And in predation, just like the worst frauds in the savings and loan crisis explain it, the weak, the meek, and the ignorant are our best targets, which they read as basically elderly black and brown people. And so for those folks, we're going to look for them particularly. We're going to try to lend to them, and we're going to charge them a significantly higher interest rate.
The ability to set the interest rates as high as they wanted incentivized banks to engage in unprecedented levels of predatory lending across the country, mostly concentrated in minority neighborhoods. But there was another aspect to this deregulation that would really set the wheels of the 2008 financial crisis into motion.
Second thing is you could now grow immensely because you can book all of that interest immediately as supposed profit. In fact, when they got to these adjustable rate mortgages that could double, right, explosive rate arms they're called, this created something called phantom interest. This is no cash comes in, but for accounting purposes, I get to treat it as if they were paying at the higher exploded rate, which is twice as high as the actual rate of cash.
This, of course, would set the bank up to lose big on the loan, but would allow the CEO to take out a massive bonus based on those fictional profits, which is how a CEO commits accounting control fraud, a federal felony. And thanks to the limitless amount of interest banks could now charge to borrowers, there was seemingly no end to how much loot the bank CEO could take home.
The fraud recipe needs extremely rapid growth, like 50% a year. Well, now you could grow 50%, 100%, 200%. Some of them grew 1,000% a year. So, this is an environment in which fraud sings.
Sure enough, removing all rules surrounding what banks could do with their interest rates would lead to a rash of predatory lending that became the savings and loan crisis of the 1980s. And while the savings and loan crisis ultimately cost the country billions of dollars before Bill Black and the OTS were able to stop them, we were protected from even greater economic damage thanks to other laws that made sure none of these banks had been able to grow large enough to pose a systemic threat. Laws that Ronald Reagan was also working overtime to do away with. And first in the sights were all prohibitions against the creation of nationwide banks.
Up until the 1980s, banks essentially had to operate within one state. They couldn't open branches across state lines. There was always this concern about nationwide banks would have tremendous political influence and that they would gobble up the smaller banks. And I remember talking to one of the senior Treasury staff people at that time, and I said, I notice you're making a lot of arguments about diversification and size is always better. And he said, yes, that's certainly what we believe. And I said, what is the largest, most diversified organization in the world today? And he said, I don't know what. I said, the Soviet Union, how well are they doing? And he looked at me sort of like a deer in the headlights. Like it just never occurred to him that what they were creating was sort of a corporate Soviet Union.
Once the big banks grew beyond their state lines, they immediately started to gobble up smaller regional and community banks, which demolished competition and concentrated the power of the financial system into just a handful of banking giants. And with this newfound size came newfound danger, banks that were too big to fail. Too big to fail banks are systemically dangerous banks that, if they fail, have the potential to take the rest of the economy down with them. This ultimately forces the government, with taxpayer money, to bail them out. The deregulation of interest rates promoted this kind of massive growth through incentivizing corrupt brokers and allowing bankers to commit control fraud. Interstate banking promoted even more growth simply by allowing the nation's largest banks to swallow up the smaller ones. But even still, banks continue to be held back from truly limitless growth by one remaining New Deal law that, despite Wall Street's best efforts, was still hanging on for dear life. The law known as Glass-Steagall.
Glass-Steagall was kind of interesting because the Pecora hearings were so devastating. Congress said, we can't have this model where banks can use their deposits to buy all these high-risk securities.
Banks got to use the guaranteed deposit base to take these crazy bets in an environment where it was all OPM, three most dangerous letters on Wall Street, other people's money. They just generated all this junk, took home huge bonuses, and then when it collapsed, they said, oh, not us, right? And Glass-Steagall said, we don't want our deposits to be used as the foundation for the risky bets you guys are making. That was a Roosevelt-era decision that gave us 50 years of banking stability.
If there was ever a common-sense banking law, especially in light of the Great Depression, it was Glass-Steagall. And it held firm through both Democratic and Republican administrations for over a half-century. But while bankers and their representatives had been chipping away at Glass-Steagall since its inception, they wouldn't manage to completely do away with it until a Democrat, with uniquely close ties to Wall Street took office.
It is true that the Glass-Steagall law is no longer appropriate to the economy in which we live. We've tried to modernize the economy, and today what we're doing is modernizing the financial services industry, tearing down these antiquated walls and granting banks significant new authority.
This new authority simply meant allowing bankers to go back to using depositor money to make the same kinds of fraudulent investments that led to the Great Depression. The key feature of Glass-Steagall was that it restricted banks to being either a deposit bank or an investment bank. But under no circumstances was the same bank allowed to be both. And it was this core part of the law that two banking giants set out to obliterate. Citibank, a deposit bank, and Travelers Insurance, an investment bank, using a loophole in the law, merged to create Citigroup, which in addition to being the first deposit investment bank since the 1920s, was also at that time the largest financial institution in world history.
Now, this merger was not lawful under Glass-Steagall, but Glass-Steagall, if you have a merger, gives you a little bit of time, if you have an unlawful activity, to unwind it. In this case, 2 years, basically. And that was perfect from the standpoint of Citi and Travelers.
That would tell Congress, hey, look, this is a $1 trillion institution, the biggest financial company ever created at that time, 1998. Now, Congress, if you don't repeal Glass-Steagall, in 2 years, we're going to have to blow this thing apart. You know, so Congress, you will be responsible after we created this $1 trillion company, you'll be responsible for what happens when it blows apart.
What they ginned up was pure extortion, because it was putting a gun to the head of Congress and saying, you're going to rip apart the largest financial company in America, and the economy may completely tank as a result of this. Or you can get rid of Glass-Steagall.
Instead of standing up to the banks, the vast majority in Congress caved to the pressure and gave enthusiastic support towards repealing Glass-Steagall. But that wasn't true of everyone. Byron Dorgan, a senator from North Dakota, understood the historical importance of Glass-Steagall and was astonished at the fervor of the rest of his colleagues for dismantling it.
My own sense is that when the Congress offered legislation and the administration came in full-throated, the Treasury Secretary, the President, I mean from my party, said, let's do this. I thought it was just bizarre. Why would we do this? What compelling reason would we have to do this, other than that Citi wanted to buy Travelers and couldn't, right? And so they began making a case that we need to strike down this legislation. They stood on the floor of the Senate day after day attacking what they were trying to do, saying, this is nuts. I said, within a decade, we're going to have massive bailouts. This is craziness.
I mean, it may be that I am hopelessly old-fashioned, that the lessons learned in the 1930s, when we had this massive failure across this country, and people understood, you know something, we did something wrong here. We allowed the financial institutions, and especially banks in this country, to be involved in circumstances that were inherently risky, and it was a dumb thing to do. And the result was we created barriers, saying, let's not let that happen again. Let's never let that happen again. And those barriers are now being torn down with a bill called Financial Modernization. I think we will, in 10 years' time, look back and say we should not have done that, because we forgot the lessons of the past. And those lessons represented timeless truths that were as true in the year 2000 or 2010 as they were in the year 1930 or 1935.
Ultimately, Senator Dorgan's pleas fell on deaf ears, and the bill to fully repeal Glass-Steagall passed the Senate 92-8.
What happened was there was this big steamroller come through, and it was Republicans and Democrats all celebrating the notion, let's lift the shackles off America's financial institutions. I'm sure they had a big celebration when they got it done, thinking it was a great thing. It turned out to be something that upended the American economy ultimately.
Fascinating little detail here for connoisseurs of Washington, D.C. behavior. Robert Rubin, who had been Treasury Secretary and had worked so hard to get Glass-Steagall overturned. Robert Rubin resigns from government right about then. Where does he go to work? Citibank. There's this term in DC, the revolving door. Yeah, you're familiar with this, right? This is the paradigmatic example.
This almost 6.5 years has been all-consuming, and I think it is time for me to go home to New York and to do whatever I'm going to do next.
With Glass-Steagall fully out of the way, banks with your money in mind were once again enabled to engage in the same kind of fraud that had caused the Great Depression.
Crises started happening right away. I mean, we all remember the dot-com telecom boom and bust. Right. That was brought to you by people like Citigroup and JP Morgan. They were deeply involved in Enron. They were deeply involved in WorldCom. And so even in 2001, 2, and 3, we saw the early signs of what was happening, right? That they're peddling really bad stuff.
And yes, there was prosperity during the Clinton years. You have to acknowledge this. You know, the stock market just wouldn't stop going up and up and up. I mean, it was good times. People were happy, but it was a bubble. If you're going to say that that was all Clinton's doing and that he bears no responsibility for the aftermath, you might as well say that, you know, Calvin Coolidge was the greatest president we've ever had, because that prosperity in the 1920s was even more fantastic. You know, it was built on sand. This is a prosperity that could not last.
Deregulations like the destruction of interest rate rules, the creation of nationwide banks, and the repeal of Glass-Steagall set the stage for the crisis to come. But even these efforts didn't go so far as to legalize the fraud we would ultimately see in the mortgage industry and on Wall Street. And so how did the big players in these industries get away with the actions that were still considered federal crimes? That takes us to the second of the 3 Ds, desupervision.
The thing that people don't understand about regulation is far more important is whether the rules are actually enforced. And that principal job of a regulator was to be the cop on the beat, to make sure the rule of law was real so that honest business people could prevail, because honest business people will treat customers well. In other words, when we stop the crooks, we make capitalism work, and only when we stop the crooks.
After the Great Depression, the FDR administration didn't just work to get new laws passed to stop banks from crashing the economy again. They also set up federal agencies that ensured banks followed these new laws. They were the cops on the beat. And these cops, for the most part, did a great job of policing the financial industry. No greater example of which was the federal crackdown on the savings and loan frauds of the 1980s.
The Office of Thrift Supervision stops this massive epidemic in its tracks, then prosecutes the great bulk of the worst leaders. Huge success. Public finance scholars talk about us as the unsung heroes and use this as the exemplar of effective regulation. They say, now we know better, and we don't have to have a repeat of these kind of financial crises if we learn these lessons.
Yet despite this confidence, when the one SNL fraudster who got away, Roland Arnall, brought the exact same crime scheme to the mortgage industry less than a decade later, the regulators were nowhere to be found, much to the frustration of those who were fighting desperately to put out the fire before it became an inferno.
The regulators fell asleep on the job. There were no referrals coming from the OCC or the Fed. And I had a lead high-level person from the OCC come to me and ask me one day, I don't even know how to make a fraud referral. How would I do that?
They had hearings in 2000 where they went around the country and asked about the problems of lending. I testified at a hearing in Chicago, and time and again they heard the devastation that was happening in low and moderate income communities caused by bankers, by lenders, and they chose to ignore it.
Millions of Americans were being swept up in a financial crime wave that threatened to take down the whole system. And officials across the country were desperately trying to get regulators to act before it was too late. But for some reason, they simply refused. How would these financial cops, who had just been so effective in stopping the SNL crisis, suddenly become so derelict in their duties? Where were they when millions of Americans like Addie depended on them for protection? The fact is that the reasons differ from regulator to regulator. The CFTC, for example, which was led by Brooksley Born, did try to stop it by putting regulations on derivatives, until she was stopped by Robert Rubin, Alan Greenspan, and the rest. But with the warning signs already showing up in the 90s, that still left 5 other institutions who had more than enough time and authority to stop this crime wave well before any predatory lender ever set foot on Addie Polk's doorstep. So why didn't any of them step up to the plate? A look to the next presidential administration will illustrate exactly why.
The Clinton administration gutted the ability to have effective financial regulation. But the Bush administration decided to absolutely crush any remnants.
I do believe in the American dream, and I believe those of us who have been given positions of responsibility must do everything we can to spotlight the dream and to make sure the dream shines in all neighborhoods. Owning a home is a part of that dream. And so one of the things that I'm going to talk about a little bit today is how to create a sustained commitment by the private sector that will have a powerful impact.
Immediately upon entering office, George W. Bush began pushing for increased homeownership in minority communities across the country, which sounds like a great plan on the surface, until you realize that the lenders to those communities would be people like Roland Arnall, who incidentally happened to be the largest donor to Bush's election campaign.
After all, the real estate industry benefits when people are encouraged to buy homes. It's in their self-interest that we encourage people to buy homes.
While Bush was busy promoting the interest of companies like AmeriQuest and Countrywide from the podium, he was also hard at work behind the scenes, making sure that those lenders saw no impediments from any of the regulators assigned to oversee them.
The Bush administration put folks into the regulatory agencies who believed in destroying regulation. They put into the head of the Office of Thrift Supervision a guy named Gillerin, who we call Chainsaw Gillerin. So it's a picture of him, the head of the Office of Thrift Supervision, holding a chainsaw. And what Gillerin wants to convey, because the chainsaw is not a precision cutting instrument, is they're just going to slash and burn through all regulation. And that they're proud to be seen working hand in glove with industry lobbyists to destroy any remnants of the rule of law.
But Gillerin was far from the only Bush appointee to a major financial regulator who was vehemently against policing the bankers. The sister regulator to the OTS was called the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, or the OCC, and was the government agency mandated to regulate national banks. And at the same time Chainsaw Gillerin was heading up the OTS, Julie Williams was working as general counsel over at the OCC. And if you want to know Julie Williams' stance on bank regulation, just ask former Minnesota Assistant AG Prentice Cox, who went to the OCC seeking her help in stopping the epidemic of bank fraud that had swept his state.
I organized this meeting of about half a dozen of the states with the counsel's office for the OCC, and I thought they got to pay attention to this. This is a major fraud, and because it's their regulated entities, they have all kinds of authority to just knock this out. They can shut them down like that. We show up at this meeting, and we wait for Julie Williams, the general counsel of the OCC, to come into the room. She comes in after we're all there, and I talk about it for just a couple minutes. I'm expecting, well, show us your data, show us who's involved in this, what are the players. Julie Williams looks at us, and for 15 or 20 minutes, she proceeds to lecture us about the special place of national banks in our federal system, that the OCC is the only one that has any authority to go after fraud against its regulated entities, and get the hell out. That's pretty much the message.
The role the OCC had in the growth of predatory lending cannot be underestimated. And every single time either a state threatened to pass a legislation or passed legislation, the OCC, Julie Williams in particular, would step in and say, those laws that you're passing, they don't apply to national banks.
Their position was that under their regulations, states had no authority to enforce their own laws against national banks. Once you saw that regulation coming out, you put it together with this lecture and their utter uninterest in this massive fraud, you began to understand that we weren't on the same side. That the OCC was on the side of the banks, that they were standing between us and what I saw as their regulated entities, and frankly, what I came to see that they saw as their customers, the banks.
Julie Williams and the OCC's aggressive resistance to stopping criminal bankers, to the point of even preventing states from using their own laws to do so, doesn't seem to make much logical sense. But one extra little bit of information about Julie Williams and the OCC makes their motivations much clearer. Where they got their paychecks.
There were conflicts of interest that kept the regulators on the sideline that when people hear about them, they honestly can't believe. The first one is the major federal regulators were funded by the institutions that they supervised. They're working for the institutions they're supposed to be regulating.
The web pages of the agency began to read like a commercial venture. Come and be part of us, type of thing. We'll treat you a lot better than your other regulators will do.
And famously, Countrywide, one of the people most responsible for a lot of the bad loans and driving the crisis, they told their regulator, we're tired of you looking over our loans, goodbye. We're switching over to the OTS, which they literally did. 1/4 of OCC's budget went with them because Countrywide was so large. And that just reverberated through the regulatory world. You mess with these folks and they'll take your funding away.
So they were competing for the bank's business. And how were they competing for the bank's business? By telling them that they weren't going to regulate them.
I personally witnessed this, indeed, helped me make the decision to leave as a financial regulator. We were ordered to refer to the industry as our customer. And I don't mean we were kind of ordered, we were expressly ordered to use exactly that word. Now, being the kind of person I am, I stood up and said, surely you mean the citizens of the United States of America. And they said, no, we thought about that, but we rejected that.
The OTS and the OCC, two of the most important federal financial regulators, had been completely compromised by these conflicts of interest, standing squarely on the side of bankers rather than the side of the Americans whom the banks were victimizing. So with two more dead ends, state officials like Prentice Cox sought the help of another institution with even more direct authority to stop the spreading crisis.
Those of us who are consumer advocates were desperately trying to get to the Federal Reserve Board. Why? Because the Federal Reserve Board had the authority to stop this. They had something called HOPA authority, Home Ownership Equity Protection Act.
And what HOPA did is that once that loan was sold to the secondary market, the holder of that loan was fully liable for the behavior of the people who made that loan. If you violated HOPA, that Wall Street investment bank who owned that loan, who was bringing that foreclosure, was fully liable for the behavior of the lender who made that original loan.
And it wasn't just that the Federal Reserve had the power. Congress put language in that used the word shall write regulations. So that was really a mandate. It wasn't discretionary.
It was the chairman of the Federal Reserve who had the authority to use this statute, making him uniquely positioned to single-handedly stop this crisis before it even started. However, this particular chairman was, to say the least, not known for his willingness to use any regulation when it came to the financial industry.
So one of the biggest problems we had in the savings and loan debacle is that the economists were entirely on the side of the fraudsters. And one of the most prominent of them was a guy named Alan Greenspan, who famously said that Lincoln Savings posed no foreseeable risk of loss. Well, it cost $3.4 billion, the most expensive failure in U.S. history to that point of a bank. And for that act of complete incompetence, he was punished by never being heard of again. Oh no, we actually made him chairman of the Federal Reserve.
Once appointed to the Fed chair, Greenspan, despite having witnessed the devastation caused by the banks in the savings and loan crisis, refused to use any of his authority against similar frauds in the following years. In fact, his deliberately ignoring Glass-Steagall helped lead to its demise. And at the same time he ardently supported the repeal of Glass-Steagall, he was also in active opposition to Brooks Lee-Born, as she warned of the urgent need to regulate derivatives.
I know of no set of supervisory actions we can take that will prevent people from making dumb mistakes. I know of no piece of legislation that can be passed by the Congress which would require us to prevent them from making dumb mistakes. I think it's very important for us not to introduce regulation for regulation's sake.
And it was this anti-rule enforcement position that made for a real problem when HOEPA still could have prevented the coming mortgage crisis.
Now, he, and only he, had authority to use this HOEPA statute, and he absolutely refused to do it. He was an Ayn Rand groupie. And the ideology was, A, we don't need to do no stinking regulations, we don't need no stinking laws. Bankers will simply kumbaya, self-police, and be wonderful. Now, he just used that logic on Lincoln Savings, who've been proven absolutely wrong, and he maintained that ideology.
His ideology was an ideology of deregulation, of letting the markets run uncontrolled, that banks would make rational decisions that would benefit everybody. And what he failed to understand, that banks were making rational decisions. They were making rational decisions to line their pockets with other people's money and the rest of the economy be damned.
And not only did Greenspan have the authority to use HOEPA, he had multiple early warnings urging him to do so before it was too late.
Back in 2001, I was the Assistant Secretary for Financial Institutions at Treasury. A wonderful man, the late Ned Gramlich, was on the board of the Fed. You know, we saw it then. We see these negative amortization loans, these payment shock loans, and tragically heavily concentrated in minority neighborhoods. These were equity stripping loans, again, targeting people who already had homes, who had equity in their home.
This deeply disturbed Ned Gramlich. And as a governor of the Federal Reserve, he knew that it was within the Chairman Greenspan's power to put this predatory lending nightmare to a complete stop.
Gramlich was very interesting because he came from Michigan. He was an economist. He saw firsthand the predations of subprime lending. He went to Alan Greenspan and urged him to activate the power to regulate predatory loans. And Greenspan told him to drop it.
Had warned him.
Had warned him. Oh, yes, Gramlich.
Gramlich was aware of all of this, and he warned Greenspan.
Yes, he was Cassandra, played the role of Cassandra in Greek mythology. Cassandra warned early about impending disaster.
Ned Gramlich unfortunately passed away in 2007, but although his warnings ultimately went unheeded, Sheila Bair still wasn't done fighting for their common cause. After being appointed to the chair of the FDIC, she once again did everything in her power to try to get Greenspan to act.
I came to the FDIC in the summer of 2006. Our economists are already on top of this. I wrote in my book, I wrote about how we bought a database of these securitized mortgages and seeing, you know, the lack of income documentations, the little if any down payment, they were toxic. They were absolutely toxic. And we started speaking about it in late 2006 and early 2007, pushed for lending standards, pushed for the Fed to write lending standards for everybody, bank and non-bank mortgage originator, and just flat out refused. Mr. Greenspan didn't want to, the staff didn't want to. I can't remember the number of conversations I had with the consumer staff at the Fed. They did not want to use that authority. They said it was going to constrain credit. They didn't want to do it. It was just, I don't understand why they didn't. I really don't. I called it, Ned called it, a lot of people called it. It wasn't a surprise that this thing spun out of control.
Alan Greenspan received warning after warning from people both inside and outside of the Federal Reserve that a crisis was coming. Yet despite all of that, not to mention his prior experience with Lincoln Savings, Greenspan to this day still holds to the claim that he simply never could have seen the financial crisis coming.
Nobody forecast the 2008 crisis. You can't have a crisis of that nature that is not a surprise.
So
And you look back on your term as the Federal Reserve Chair, would you have done anything different in light of events that happened after you left? Would you have done something differently?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Greenspan had the power to single-handedly stop the mortgage crisis in its tracks, which would have saved the homes of millions of Americans and very likely the life of Addie Polk. But his refusal to act rendered the Federal Reserve useless in its capacity to uphold the law and protect the country from the oncoming disaster. So with every other federal regulator compromised in their ability to stop the crisis, the last hope for the country rested in the hands of one final institution, the agency established by Ferdinand Pecora himself, specifically to keep Wall Street bankers from committing the kinds of fraud that caused the Great Depression, the Securities and Exchange Commission. Leading up to the crisis, the SEC seemed to be on top of things as they were hot on the trail of what appeared to be a fraudulent financial deal set up between Goldman Sachs and a hedge fund manager named John Paulson, who was looking to bet big against the housing market. Really big.
This is the greatest trade in financial history. No one's come close. Just to give you a sense of the size, Paulson made $20 billion over a 2-year span. By way of comparison, the second biggest trade in financial history was George Soros betting against the British pound in 1992, and that's just $1 billion of profits.
The size of these trades was enough to catch the attention of the SEC, but one particular deal really piqued their interest. It was known as Abacus. The origins of Abacus date back to late 2006, when Goldman was facing potential insolvency because of how heavily their outgoing CEO, Hank Paulson, no relation to John Paulson, got them involved in toxic mortgages during the previous years. The fictional accounting profits from all of these bad mortgages allowed Paulson to depart from Goldman with $500 million in stock, which he would quickly cash out. This left the bank itself in dire straits, as the mortgage market was beginning to disintegrate. This, of course, is something you would see when the CEO runs his business using the fraud recipe. With Hank Paulson out the door, it was now up to the incoming CEO, Lloyd Blankfein, to find a way to hedge all of these bad mortgages before the plummeting housing market took down the bank. And lucky for Lloyd, along came John Paulson.
So Paulson had a hunch that housing market was becoming overheated, that there were all these kind of aggressive mortgages being handed out left and right, but he needed some data. And he came up with a beautiful chart showing how housing market for years, slowly over decades and decades, slowly grew 5-6% a year, and then suddenly was soaring at a pace that just didn't seem sustained. And he's like, wow, this is our Rosetta Stone. This is the reason why we're gonna back up the truck and bet it all on the market imploding, the housing market.
Goldman worked together with Paulson to handpick the worst of the worst mortgages on their books. Mortgages they knew were going to tank, dump them into Abacus, and then bet billions of dollars on those mortgages to fail. A bet that ultimately became known as the Big Short. This maneuver, the only one the SEC would ever look at, allowed Goldman to make money off of their own fraudulent mess, while at the same time allowing John Paulson to become one of the richest people on Wall Street. But there was a catch. This bet could only work if Goldman was able to convince other customers to take the other end of it. And they did just that. Goldman feverishly sold the toxic assets contained in Abacus as good investments to customers all around the world, never disclosing that they, in conjunction with Paulson, were betting the farm that they would fail. And when those mortgages finally did fail, Goldman and Paulson made billions, while all those investors, like Butch and Rita Lewis's pension fund, lost everything. And it was this fallout that caught the attention of the SEC, who opened up a fraud investigation into Abacus. Tasked to lead this investigation was Jim Kidney.
Jim Kidney was investigating Goldman Sachs for its role with Abacus. And Kidney said, this looks like a conspiracy. This looks like a scheme to defraud. It looks like a plan between Paulson and Goldman to create this instrument that was going to collapse and defraud the buyers who lost money on this. Let's try to develop that as a charge, a securities fraud charge.
This was an ambitious undertaking, but Kidney had a great place to start thanks to some careless communications by a low-level trader.
The SEC complaint quotes an email from Goldman Vice President Fabrice Touré, sent as the housing market was plummeting, saying, "The whole building is about to collapse any time now. Only potential survivor, the fabulous Fab, referring to himself.
Fabrice Fabulous Tour. The SEC loved this guy because he called himself fabulous in an email and said a lot of stupid things about the coming financial crisis. So the SEC was going to nail him. And Kidney actually had a very simple proposition, which was, let's interview Tour's bosses.
Kidney's proposition was a standard approach to investigating organized crime. Start with a low-level guy and get him to flip and work your way to the top. And Fabulous Fab had given him the perfect starting point for just this type of investigation. But to Kidney's surprise, the SEC didn't see things the same way.
The SEC higher-up said no. They said you can't interview his bosses, and we reject this legal theory. It's airy, it's fairy, it's out there, we're never going to win it. And this was inexplicable.
I said, my God, there's no further investigation? And so I protested. I said, this is a really great case. We've got to investigate this a lot more. We've got to do a lot more with this thing. There's no way that $1 billion deal doesn't go up pretty high up the food chain at Goldman Sachs for approval. And in fact, there were a lot of emails already that had been produced that showed that there were a lot of people in the food chain who may well have had full knowledge about this deal beyond the low-level guys on the trading desk. We never questioned anybody in this investigation above the level of the trading desk.
When the SEC finally did charge Fabrice Tour, Kidney's boss sent an email around, and he said, I want you guys to remember that the people we charge are good people who have made one bad mistake. Good people who have made one bad mistake. How do they know? How do the people at the SEC know that these people are good people? Are the Goldman Sachs bankers good or not? And has this been one mistake, or was this a pattern of behavior? Did they do this over and over again? Why do we think that these are fundamentally good, honest people? Maybe they're not.
When these individuals, and it's always individuals, create something that they know to have major flaws and not tell people on the other who they're selling it to, because if they did tell them, they know damn well nobody'd buy it in their right mind. Those are individuals doing that, and you have to go after those individuals. You have to investigate to find those individuals. One of the biggest tragedies of the failure to investigate at the SEC after the 2008 financial crisis is that we don't have the story. We didn't ask. The investigation was suppressed.
While the SEC refused to take the investigation to Goldman Sachs any further, many bank CEOs were called to testify before Congress in the aftermath of the crisis. Among them, Goldman Sachs CEO Lloyd Blankfein. Having been taken off the Goldman case, Jim Kidney had never seen Blankfein's congressional testimony, and so he played it for him to get his reaction to seeing it for the first time.
You don't believe it's relevant to a customer of yours that you are selling a security to, that you are betting against that same security. You just don't think it's relevant and needs to be disclosed. Is that the bottom line?
Yes, and the people who are selling it in our firm wouldn't even know what the firm's position is, and...
Oh, yes, they did.
What do you think of that?
With all respect to Chairman Blankfein, that is total bullshit. As I got into the Goldman case, I had a little sign that I put up on my wall. It is legal for the long to create the product and sell it to the short. It is illegal for the short to create the product and sell it to the long. In a nutshell, that's what most of these mortgage-backed security deals were all about. Blankfein just stated a recipe for fraud. I know what I saw. I know that despite my efforts to persuade, I failed to get the SEC to investigate further on my case. And I know that other lawyers down the hall, trial lawyers, failed in trying to get the SEC to investigate further and maybe to name some individuals in their cases.
One such lawyer was Gary Aguirre, who a few years prior to Jim Kidney had been on the trail of two Wall Street giants, Art Sandberg and John Mack, for insider trading. Gary discovered that in 2005, John Mack had spent 3 days in Zurich meeting with top executives at Credit Suisse. During the same time, and unrelated to the meeting, Credit Suisse had been preparing for the acquisition of a hedge fund called Heller Financial, a deal that had not yet been made public. Yet after his time in Zurich, Mack seemingly, out of the blue, bought up several $1 million in Heller stock, an investment that he would triple once Credit Suisse publicly announced the acquisition shortly thereafter. Not only that, but the Friday he left Zurich, Mack put in a call to Art Sandberg, who also promptly bought his own shares of Heller stock, $18 million of it, more than anyone else on the planet. To a financial crimes prosecutor with Gary's expertise, the red flags were clear and beyond suspicious.
Max, 3 days in Zurich, the phone call on the Friday evening, and then the massive purchasing. This was almost a textbook example of the circumstantial evidence of insider trading.
In fact, Gary's case had become so strong that both Gary's branch chief Bob Hansen and SEC Assistant Director Mark Kreitman made it unambiguously clear that this was a case that needed to be taken to the next level.
Kreitman told me what we really wanted to do was go criminal with the case. We wanted to get the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District involved in the case, and we wanted to go criminal. Now, that's the way you change things. You know, the SEC can find somebody and make them pay a fee. It's like a tax almost for an insider trader. But if you put them in prison, that's a game changer. That sends a message. So they opened a criminal investigation of Heller Financial, Sandberg, and Mack.
With the investigation now elevated to a criminal case, Gary's next step was to schedule an interview with Mack about what had inspired him and Sandberg to buy such massive quantities of Heller stock if it hadn't been from an inside tip. But it was just as Gary began making these preparations that things started to get strange.
Shortly after that, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that said Mack being considered as incoming CEO for Morgan Stanley. And then I get a call from Morgan Stanley, from the head of their compliance unit, and he says they cannot bring in Mack as the CEO if he's coming in with an insider trading tale. We got to know whether you're going to file against Mack. And I say, that's above my pay grade. I can't answer that question. I couldn't tell you if I knew, and I don't know. It was a stunner.
Unsettling as the call was, Gary forged ahead until the only thing between him and Mack was one final approval from his branch chief. And that's when things took an even stranger turn.
So I stop off at Hansen's office, who's my branch chief, the next one up, and I said, you know, I think it's time to take Mack's testimony. And he says, I can't green light his testimony. You know, this is a 180-degree flip-flop. What he's saying is, don't do it. This guy has got political clout. He's got powerful political connections. He said that at 3 or 4 different ways. Don't do it.
This flip-flop from Hansen was suspicious, especially in light of the call Gary had received from Morgan Stanley. Unnerved by the situation, Gary immediately went to Paul Berger, the next person up in the SEC chain of command, to hopefully gain his support in allowing the case to continue.
I sent an email to Berger laying the whole thing out. This thing was going great. Here are all the emails from day one. Here's all the encouragement I had. Everybody was applauding it until Mack got invited to go back to Morgan Stanley. And then it stopped. And I don't think that powerful political connections are a reason to stop an investigation.
Berger said it was insulting for Gary to even suggest that the SEC would stop one of its own criminal investigations for political reasons, and told Gary to get out of his office. Yet even with his entire chain of command now standing against his investigation, Gary persisted and began preparations to subpoena Mack into the SEC for an interview. And that's when things took yet another turn.
Thursday, I get a call from Kreitman. And he says, Gary, you know, we've looked over your work for the last year. We're not going to be able to continue your employment next year. You're fired. At that point, that was the straw. You know, I said, you know, in so many words, excuse me, but okay, you bastards. I'm not backing down. Now, there's one thing the SEC didn't plan on. When they fired me, they immediately terminated my access to my emails. What I didn't know is that 2 weeks before, when an IT guy came to my office to fix my computer, he had inadvertently created a PST, which shouldn't have been there, but was there. And all of my emails came back up except for the last 2 weeks. So I had all the emails.
And it was these emails that gave Gary all the evidence he needed to approach the Senate Judiciary Committee and request that they open up an investigation into the conduct of every single one of his superiors at the SEC, which they promptly did.
The issue of the investigation into charges brought by Mr. Gary Guerra has attracted the attention of the committee. At best, it looks like extraordinarily lax enforcement by the Securities and Exchange Commission. That's at best. And at worst, it has the overtone of a possible cover-up.
As I told Gary at least twice, the SEC is not and never has been afraid to take anyone's testimony.
They had no knowledge at all about Mr. Mack's political connections at that point. Politics have never been involved in deciding whether to take someone's testimony.
It was Mr. Aguirre's behavior and conduct, storming down the halls in a furious crouch, his refusal to accept any kind of direction or supervision that led to his termination.
So they testify, and they're denying things, but during the cross-examination, things are coming out. You know, Specter starts asking the SEC about how Mack tripled his money, and he's not getting any answers. They're trying to dodge around his questions.
I know that one of the investments that Mr. Mack put money into with Pequot around that time, he lost all the money on. And another one, he doubled the money.
I'm interested in what he lost money on. I'm interested in a lot of things, but not today. What I want today is an answer if you learned from Mr. Aguirre, this is the last time I'm going to ask it, that Mr. Stanberg gave Mr. Mack an opportunity for an investment that he tripled.
I don't believe so. I think there was an investment, and I'm not sure, again, on the facts, which one doubled and which one he lost money on, which one he's referring to.
Was there one that doubled?
I think so.
Was that different from the one that tripled?
I'm not aware of one that tripled.
The Senate ultimately vindicated Gary, concluding that the SEC did stop the investigation into Mack for political reasons, a conclusion that resulted in Gary being awarded the largest settlement to a federal employee against a government agency in history. But this wasn't all that came out of these hearings. It was also discovered that the collusion between the SEC and Morgan Stanley was more direct, and even more disturbing than Gary had suspected.
The same day that I get the call from Morgan Stanley, Mary Jo White calls Linda Thompson, who's the enforcement director, and they have a chit-chat. She is suggesting to Thompson that Mack is coming in, and an investigation for Mack by the SEC for insider trading is not going to sit well with the board of directors of Morgan Stanley. The SEC told Morgan Stanley that my case wasn't going anywhere because Morgan Stanley wanted him as their CEO. They wanted him as their CEO. And that was enough to blow off an investigation that had just been elevated to a criminal investigation. Nothing happened to John Mack. Nothing.
Instead of being prosecuted for insider trading, John Mack was appointed to CEO of Morgan Stanley in 2005, where he presided over a massive expansion in their mortgage-backed securities operations that would ultimately bring Morgan Stanley to the brink. Mack would step down on September 14, 2008, a day before the collapse. Just a few years later, when the time came to appoint a new SEC chair, the person to get the job was none other than Mary Jo White, the Morgan Stanley lawyer responsible for stopping Gary's investigation into John Mack.
For the first time, I understood that the SEC was not merely a weakened version of what it was supposed to be. It was an agent of Wall Street.
Here's the tragedy. Not only did the SEC once have a stellar reputation, many of the people at the most senior positions of the SEC in a prior life had been known as vigorous prosecutors. But suddenly, when they got to dealing with the world's largest banks, all the past glory of the SEC and even the past glory of these individuals went poof. They didn't even try. They didn't get the facts. They didn't do what Pecora did. This is the easiest financial crisis in the history of the world to prevent. First, you had the best conceivable, unambiguous warnings of massive fraud. It's not a policy issue, right? You see fraud, you stop fraud. It's not a hard thing, right? And in every case, they didn't.
If people had listened to Gary Aguirre and if they had listened to Richard Bowen, had listened to Michael Winston, a lot of this wouldn't have happened. But unfortunately, the wrongdoing that they revealed got covered up. And their thanks for trying to do the right thing at huge risk to their jobs and their careers and their families, their thanks was to get fired and to get blackballed from the industry.
So A, there was all these warnings. B, these fraud schemes we had seen and successfully squashed in the savings and loan debacle. Home loans are easy. Compared to the savings and loan debacle, that was commercial real estate. Those deals are incredibly complex and sophisticated. Home loans? This is child's play to recognize these frauds, right? So against the easiest to stop fraud epidemics in history, they not only didn't try to succeed to stop the crisis, as Gary Aguirre's story and Kidney's story tell you, they stopped even the investigations from going into the elite criminals. That's how badly the system's broken. The rule of law ceased to exist.
This was the culmination of Wall Street's nearly 30-year campaign against any kind of regulation or supervision, a campaign that had finally paid off as every protective measure that it had taken FDR, Ferdinand Pecora, and the Great Depression to create had been completely destroyed. Now it would be only a matter of time until the national disaster the Reagans, Greenspans, Clintons, Rubins, and Bushes of the world told us would never happen again would once again be on our doorstep, leaving Addie Polk and millions like her to drown in an economic tidal wave that could no longer be stopped.
Breaking news here. Stocks all around the world are tanking because of the crisis on Wall Street.
We're down 1.7% here, a loss of 37.
The stock market is now down 21%.
We're now down 43%.
All right, welcome back, folks. So that was episode 4 of the con. Episode 5 is going to be crazy. I mean, the way he left it, that's a cliffhanger of a cliffhanger. I just wanted to say what I get from this episode here is this right here. So for all of you MAGA folk out there who love Trump and can't wait to vote for him, I get it. You know, it is what it is. You know, he's telling you he's gonna, make America great again, is what he says. But I'll tell you, the thing he's going to do is he's going to do more deregulation. The 3 Ds. He's going to make sure that those 3 Ds happen at a much rapid pace, and this whole thing is gonna, it's gonna catch on fire. I'm telling you now that he's constantly threatening about closing down federal, departments of education, and they're gonna can all these government jobs and get rid of all of these people, and that is the scariest thing of it all to me, because this episode shows you what happens when you deregulate and you let these guys run the asylum. You know what I'm saying? And so that's what I got from this episode. And they're all to blame. I don't want to make this bash it Republican or whatever, because as we saw, Clinton,
it's both.
It's all of them. Clinton had a part in it. Jimmy Carter had a part in it. Reagan, Bush's, Obama. So it's not a right or a left issue. It's an issue about us taking, for the people, by the people, and of the people. You dig what I'm saying? And that's what this is all about. That, like you said, we've got to get, the first 10 seconds of this episode, we saw folks protesting the 2008 financial crisis. That's what that was. They were down there because their pensions have got stolen, and so that's what, when Roseanne says, we need to get down there before this election, that's what she's talking about. We need to flood those streets and let them know that we want our country back. You know what I mean? We want level-headed people running the show. No more of this, letting this be the wild, wild west and allowing them to, do whatever they want to do, because, we saw what happened in the 20s, and we saw what happened in the 80s with the SNL, and we saw what happened with, the .com and then the housing crisis. And so we've got to stop allowing these folks to do this to us. Because at the end of the day, we're the ones that pay for it. We pay for it through high prices. Now it's corporate greed. These corporations are just running amok. The price of it has gone through the roof on everything. And now that inflation is level, it's leveled out and things, are looking good. You don't see the prices coming down. They never come down. You know what I mean? Once they raise them, they don't ever bring them back down. And so, this is what we mean when we say get over to the website, the Clean New Deal website, dissect all that information, because it's more of what you've seen tonight. Again, you can watch the con, all 5 episodes if you want. We encourage you to come back and watch the last episode with us next week. But if you want to go ahead and watch it, do it and digest the information, because this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to, change this, because it's necessary for the next generation. Like he said in the episode, the people who controlled the bank back in those days, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, they were conservative. They it was about running it intelligently, not being cowboys, not letting them run amok. And you see through this episode how it all broke down. How we stood by and we didn't pay enough attention to it, and we allowed them to destroy the Glass-Steagall. And so, like Roseanne says, we need to get it together and get down there and let them know that we ain't taking it no more. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Rose.
Well, I'm so glad that you've been energized by this episode.
Yes.
It's a real critical episode to me. And what I see is how personal all these major decisions are. Alan Greenspan, he was warned. He says, no, no, no reason, no nothing, no. Okay. Gary Aguirre warns people.
Yep.
No, no prosecution. Jim Kidney warning people. No. Prentice Cox. Prentice Cox was out there with attorneys general from across the country. And they have the nerve to say to him, get out of here. We don't even care what your state laws say. We are in charge of regulating national banks. Well, who's paying them? The banks are paying them.
Yes, ma'am. Political
Okay.
contributions, donations. And we don't
Oh,
even know it. It's not even
that's right.
public information. So we don't know
We
who's
don't-
giving what to whom. And it's just, like you said, it's like the wild, wild west. And with that kind of recipe for disaster, you see why we're in the situation that we're in this country. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's like, now you see, Patrick has laid down the blueprint on how this happened and why it's happening. And so for us to just sit back and do nothing about it, then we have no one to blame but ourselves, because we're letting them get away with it. We have a voice in this fight, and it just means that we have to get enough voices. We don't have enough right now, but that's the key ingredient to the recipe. We have to get the voices. And so, I encourage anyone who's watching, anyone who will watch. I get it. I know it's college football season. It's NFL season. I get it. People want to sit on the couch all day and they want to watch football. And I do it too. Tomorrow, I'll be watching football all day. Monday night, I'll be rooting for my, Buffalo Bills. Go Bills. Go, Bills Mafia. Shout out to my Bills Mafia community. But, this is some serious shit, man. And people have got to get with the program, wake the hell up, unplug from the matrix, put the phone down, and get into this information, because it's right there for you. Spend 10, 15 minutes a day and you get to devour it up in a few days.
That's just what I was thinking.
Go ahead.
Take 10 or 15 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Okay? Watch it. Share it. Go to the cleannewdeal.org. Start watching episodes of The Con. A little bit at a time. Share it, share it, share it. Okay?
Yeah.
You don't have to take the whole day like I do. Okay? I'm retired.
Yeah.
But let me tell you something. Not a day goes by that I don't think about, where does my pension people, where do they have my money invested? It could all go away.
Yep.
Okay? It could all go away. And then I'll get to live on a $486 a month in Social Security.
Yeah.
Okay. Because
and that ain't nothing.
Because that's all I get, because my pension is penalized. Because I have a state pension,
Yeah.
my Social Security, because of these different laws, gets penalized 40%. They've from the day I started getting my Nevada PERS, they've cut my Social Security 40%. Okay? Because of all these. See, those are crazy regulations. Okay? Regulations aren't good or bad. Regulations are about common sense. Just because people want to drive fast That doesn't like, oh yeah, the people are just going to pay attention. We don't have to have speed limits. Can you imagine what would happen if we didn't have speed limits? Well, everybody'd go crazy. So when Alan Greenspan talks about legislation, oh, no legislation is going to stop us from making a stupid mistake. What kind of idiot is he?
It's bullshit, and he knows it. And
He
he's
knows
just trying
it.
to perpetrate it to the American people. And listen, there's a percentage of the American people that might buy that shit, but best believe the majority of us know that it's bullshit. We recognize it's bullshit, and we just ain't gonna take it anymore. And it just is what it is, And so, in order for us not to have to take it anymore, we need you to get over to that website, get that information. And I get it, people work when you're on your lunch break. You get a half an hour lunch break or 15 minutes. Go over and check it out for a half an hour while you're eating your lunch or whatever. Check a video out, and and you can always pause them, stop them, go back to them.
That's
so listen,
right.
The information is there. We've given it to you, or Patrick and Roseanne have given it to you. I've been brought on to just kind of be someone to champion the movement and just to constantly talk about it, because that's what I like to do. But I'm hoping that in the near future that I'll be able to get more involved in the whole thing. And so, listen, the information is there. Again, Roseanne, why don't you tell them where they can go find it? And it's all completely free outside of the swag. If you want to help the movement out, you can always get some swag. It goes to a great cause. Like I said, Patrick had to raise $4 million to put the con together.
4.5.
4.5 million. Okay. So when you go to the website and you watch that took $4.5 million to put together. And when he first put it out, he wanted people to pay for it, try to recoup some of that money. But he, found that people couldn't afford it. So he said, you know what, screw it. The information is so important that people need it. I'm just going to give it to you. So it's for free. You don't have to pay for it. Not a lot of things in this world are for free, but this is. So get over there, check out the con. Check out the website, and let's get this thing going, because I'll tell you right now, we can do it. No change has ever been done without making it happen.
That's
Martin
right.
Luther King and the civil rights, you know what I mean? The LGBTQ community, interracial interracial marriages, all of it. It all came about from people who said, we're not going to take this shit anymore, and they got out there and they made change happen. This is what we have to do. We have to make the change happen. And
That's
so
right. And
we're
Jay,
asking you.
I'm going to leave you with one word, and then
Go
you
ahead.
can have the final word.
Okay.
You can see the con. Just go to thecon.tv. It will come up. You can get all the episodes. Go to our website, thecleannewdeal.org. Check it out. Share it with your friends. Go page by page. Just wrap your head around it. Get as excited as Jay is right now and share it with your friends, because I'm going to tell you, I believe in the American people, and I believe that failure is not an option.
It can't be. We got to think about the next generation and the generation after that and the generation after that. Because I'm 48, and I know, Roseanne, I'm not going to put no one's age out there, but we ain't going to be here forever. At some point, we've got to hand it off to the next generation and the generation after that. So let's try to hand it off to them a little bit better than what we had. You dig what I mean? And so,
Now.
Yeah.
Do it now.
Do you want to go ahead and let the people know where they can find you on social medias, or they can get that from the website as well?
If they go to social media, we have all the icons there for Facebook and for Twitter. They can just click on those and they will be taken right there.
And they can get the YouTube channel too, the Truth Bombs with Patrick.
It's got, yes, we
and
have.
Now you're going to be doing some with them now too. Okay.
Yep. We got it all there, my dear. And thank you so much for giving up your Saturday night.
Hey, it's no worries, man. This is something worth giving up my Saturday night. And like I said, I ain't had much to do but sit around and watch some college football or whatever have you. I just hope Patrick is enjoying himself because I know he's a busy dude. So anytime he can get away and get a little R&R, I'm always happy for him when he can do that. So I hope he sees the episode. We want to thank him for his hard work, his dedication, and being the guy to go against the establishment, because people don't understand, they tried to shut him down, and they don't want this kind of stuff getting out. They don't want to be exposed like this, and he went and he did it, when it wasn't, cool to do. And so all I say is just give the man the respect to just go and look at the information. I mean, that's the least you can do. If you look at the information and you say, hey, I don't want to be bothered with this, that's fine. But just at least go look at the information, because I'm telling you, if you go look at it and you really pay attention to it, you're going to want to get involved. You're going to be one of those people that says, not no more, not on my watch. And that's just how it's going to be. I want to thank everybody who tuned in. I want to thank Roseanne for being here with me. I want to let you all know that we'll get the promotion out for next week's show. It'll probably be another Saturday. But we'll get the promotion out for next week's show, where we'll do the last episode, which is episode 5. But again, like Roseanne said, if you want to go watch it now, you go to thecon.tv, or you go to the New Clean Deal or the Clean New Deal website, and you can get there. Just go do it. That's all I'm saying. You got to do it. Go do it. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Until next time, stay blessed and always go Bills. Bye now, Roseanne.
Renaissance, a rebirth, a remix, repeat this, a reintroduction, conceive this, a whole new genre to breathe with, reproduce, so smooth on the mic and the light, my own moves, give it life, right from my own view, words mature and then grow groove, I'm the soul improve, work on me, wake up in the morning just to work on the beat, so intuitive, that's how I gotta be, when I'm in tune with the room and the God in me. It's true, never lose that. I never come through with a loose rap. Tighten up, time to enlighten them, striking like lightning, and hope I don't frighten them. Boom. Recited for you to get you excited and hype. Move with the rhythm tonight, beautiful type. Women in my inhibitions, I'll move to the side. Music's my only religion, surrounding myself with only musicians. Only the best, solely uplifting. With this combination, my music is infinite. Ideal situations, stimulate them. Wanna inspire and motivate them. My goal is take them to a higher level, let the pain escape them. It's euphoric, are you for it? I promise I know you have a use for it, so let's use it. Get into it, no matter what we call it, it's soul music.
Thanks for tuning in to the Uncle Jay podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and catch us next time. This is Uncle Jay signing off. Stay blessed and always go Bills.